Is your first time in Louisville?
No, I've been in Louisville long enough to call it Louisville. This is probably my 10th trip. I like Louisville. It's nice.
I have been digging it. I have been digging it a lot. So,
SuperCon. This is for the first time show here. It's awesome. It's really a nicely appointed room.
we do try. We try. Well, it helps when you have good audiences.
Yeah.
See what I did there? All right. I'm sorry. I'm all confused. I had to run
Wow,
upstairs.
this must be what it's like to be on Broadway. They got some serious lights up here.
They do. It's just like we see the people in the front row, and then we see some silhouettes.
All
in the
I can
back
see
there.
is silhouettes. That's correct. Reminds you of stand-up comedy. You can hear them, but you can't see them.
Pretty much. So, if it's okay with you, I'd love to let's go back to the beginning. All right. You before Munsters, you were a child actor. You were sort of knocked around. You did a episode of Untouchables.
Yeah, it's well. If we want to go to the beginning, let's go to the. Let's go.
Yeah.
First, in
Let's
the
do it.
beginning, what happened was I was in the second grade. My little sister was a very attractive little girl, and a guy in this town that we lived in wanted to be mayor. And to become mayor, he thought getting my dad's endorsement, who was an influential businessman, would be the ticket to go. And he thought the way to do that would be get his little daughter into movies. So I went along for the ride to her photo shoot. A gentleman named Amos Carr, that was a famous Hollywood photographer specializing in children, liked my look, and after he was done with my sister, he says, "Could I take a few pictures of this guy for my own personal files?" And my mom said, "Sure." And he took a picture, and he put it in the window on Hollywood Boulevard. And it just so happened, not quite the Lana Turner at Schwab's, but close to it. A producer and a director were walking by. They noticed the picture in the window, and they asked, "Is he an actor?" The guy goes, "No, he's not. He just happens to be was along for a ride." They go, boom, and better than a light falling on us. So they said, "How do we get in touch with him and let us see if we can convince him to maybe he's acting material?" Long story short, Mary Grady, who was my agent, who became my agent, was the mother of Don Grady, who was Robbie on My Three Sons. She opened the first child agency in Hollywood specializing in kids. And I became her first paying client, other than her son. And that's how I got into the movie business accidentally. Got a little B movie called The Two Little Bears that these gentlemen were producing and directing. The good news was it starred Eddie Albert, Jane Wyatt, Soupy Sales, Brenda Lee was 15 years old, the singing sensation, and Nancy Culp, Miss Hathaway, before she was Miss Hathaway. So it was a great little movie, and during that 6-week tenure, I picked up the General Hospital and a few commercials and some movies, and the rest was, and The Untouchables, as he mentioned, and Ben Casey and Rawhide and a bunch of other things from the pre-Munster days.
So you were in the system. Definitely.
I was off to the races. I had my first 3 interviews. I was a commercial, a movie, and a series, so it worked out really well. And The Real McCoys.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just a whole bunch. Did it, Mr. Ed, My Favorite Martian.
Yeah, the pop culture shows. I Dream of Jeannie. There were some shows back then. A lot of westerns, Gunsmokes, Bonanzas, Death Valley Days, Rawhide, as I mentioned before.
Yeah.
Daniel Boone. I could ride a horse. My uncle used to supply horses to the studios as a wrangler, and then my other uncle on my other side of the family was a jockey. So I used to spend a lot of time at Hollywood Park with him exercising horses, watching him exercise horses. I was only like 4 years old. But I grew up around the track, so yeah.
Being able to ride a horse and being an actor in the 60s was a pretty good thing.
And yet I didn't get a part of the Cowboys. 18 kids in Hollywood are with John Wayne, and I didn't make the cut.
That's too bad. That was a great,
I know,
great
great
film.
movie.
Great film. So, well, let's go ahead and go into the Munsters, because you were the second Eddie, were you not?
Actually,
okay.
third.
The third, okay.
Eddie, because Bill Mooney turned the role down because his mom didn't like the idea of him being in makeup. That was their first choice. I wasn't even living in Hollywood at the time. After The Real McCoys, I had gone back to live in Illinois with my grandmother. So I was pretty much off the table for almost a year. And then Happy Durman got the part after, I guess, extensive callbacks, maybe 10 or 12 callbacks, and it came down to Happy Durman, and Joan Marshall was playing the mother with the character named Phoebe. The last minute, CBS had okayed the show to be green-lighted. They made a pilot, but at the last minute, they decided to bring in Yvonne DiCarlo for the star power, and then they decided to recast the Eddie character, and my agent convinced them to fly me out for a screen test. So I pretty much bypassed all the typical callbacks and the script readings and went strictly to the studio, wardrobe, makeup. They gave me my lines, and the next day I screen tested with Yvonne DiCarlo and got the job on the spot because they told me not to go back to the airport, make arrangements to report to work. And what I had to do is my mom and my dad were living in the East Coast because he was a baseball player for the old Washington Senators, and I didn't have a place to live. So I moved in with my uncle and hired a woman to take me to work, and that's pretty much how that all worked out. So the Munsters really was my family for 2 years because my family wasn't anywhere around.
And you would commute, though, back and forth, I assume?
We would drive back and forth from South Bay, which is about a 30-mile commute, and I would go visit my mom on the East Coast usually twice a month. Every other weekend I'd fly back and visit them, which was a lot of, when you think about it, you're working a regular, you're working a series, you get on a flight, you do a red eye to go back and visit your mom, and got to know all the stewardesses, and they flew me first class. That was the best part.
That was back when first class really meant something.
That's when it was nice.
That was... Excuse me, my steak was supposed to be medium rare? Oh, we'll make it for you right away. So much. The Munsters was what it was, absolutely. Just looking back on it, what's the moment that still lingers with you?
Well, the show, a lot of people ask, the success of the show and the staying power of the show. And it's interesting because when I completed my book, Munster Memories, the guy said, well, what's your favorite memory? And I said, the Munsters was my job. My favorite memory of that 2-year window was when I had time off where I could go explore Universal Studios and see what the heck was going on elsewhere, because it was a very active, busy studio with 50 sound stages and, maybe 50 movies going any given time. So that was what I enjoyed doing. But the secret to the success of the Munsters, in my opinion, was partially it was the 60s. Non-reality based shows were very popular. Great comedy writers were writing funny things for Martians and genies and witches and talking horses and talking cars and, well, maybe not the talking cars so much, but the talking horse was very popular. So comedy was just hitting its stride in the sitcom era, because in the 50s, when like I Love Lucy and I Married Joan and all these other shows, they were really radio shows that you could see. They weren't really structured as a sitcom. That happened in the 60s. And the Munsters was shot at the Universal Studios, which was the Monster Studio. Back in the day, each studio had a specialty. MGM did musicals. Fox did disaster movies. The Munsters Universal did monster movies. So we had Leave It to Beaver, producers and writers, with their next project, created the Munsters at the Universal lot, with the Universal Studios doing the sets and the design and the lighting and shooting it on film. And it looked like mini movies from the 40s, the way it was shot. And they took the Leave It to Beaver system and the pattern of family values and kids and adults kind of interacting together in a very humorous manner, and they hit gold with the Munsters. On paper, it didn't look like it would work, but once Fred Gwynne donned the makeup and the character, he became, not Frankenstein, he became Herman Munster, lovable head of the household.
It works.
Yeah, and it worked, and it's 54 years later. Kids are still watching it with their parents and grandparents, and they like it. If they're introduced to it, most of them like it. In this day and age of video games and CG and all that stuff, they can still enjoy an old show from the dark ages, when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And Spot, by the way, was a dinosaur under the stairs.
How did the movie evolve? When they say, hey, we're thinking about doing a movie in color.
Yeah, what happened with that, they were trying to figure out what they were going to do about the third season. The ratings were down. Batman had come on the air with gangbusters and was really beating the heck out of us. So they thought, well, if we go to color, this might be the shot in the arm, and we have this extensive makeup. But the cost factor came into play between the producers in the studio and the network. Nobody wanted to pay for it. Fred and Al were New Yorkers who had been transplanted to the West Coast for 2 years. They were ready to go home. Ratings were down. Cost factor came into play. So they decided to, let's just make a movie for the world to see. That way we can introduce the Munsters for syndication packaging, because nobody else in the world knew about it, because most countries get programming from the States 2 or 3 years after they go off the air. So they wanted to jumpstart that process. And the movie was actually made as a advertising tool.
It's a big infomercial.
Very big one.
But I think that was the first thing to make a leap from that started legitimately in television into cinema.
If it wasn't the first, it was early on. I mean, the Munsters was actually a trailblazing show in several ways. Yeah, there's isolated incidents of people sleeping in the same bed on television, but for a mainstream Hollywood show with family values, Herman and Lily sleeping in a king-size bed was very unique. I mean, it was very groundbreaking. We did a lot of interesting things. We had the first cool cars as family vehicles. Yeah, Sunset Strip had Eddie's Kooky T, but for a family car, the Munster Coach and the Dragula by George Barris were like the really coolest cars on television early on. We had really good guest stars early in their comedic careers. If you look at it, it's like a laundry list of Don Rickles, Harvey Korman, Frank Gorshin, Jesse White. Just the list is very extensive. Louis Nye on Zombo, one of my favorite episodes. We had really good people, really good writers, and the show didn't really have a weak link in it. The music, the sets, the design, everything was strong.
Absolutely. That went its course. You jumped back in, did a lot of TV work. Again, you had the My Three Sons connection, so they brought you on that.
Yeah, I was on the show for like 5 years. I did about 3 or 4 episodes a year, and I'd always come back as a different name. And it was like, I think Virginia Martindale, who was the casting director, just liked the fact that she didn't have to have a casting call, when she could just call Mary and say, send Butch out, we got some more lines for him, and it's made her job easier. So I wound up doing 27 episodes over 5 years. Usually Ernie's best friend.
Yeah. Hey, Ernie.
That's right.
Yeah. You did some Disney work.
Yeah, when you're a kid actor, Disney is the studio that you aspire to go to. And after the Munsters, I did a couple World of Colors. I did a couple features for them. Not as the star, usually as a supporting role, but the World of Colors, I did two-parters one summer, which is pretty unusual because a lot of times when you do work at a studio, they don't like you to come back in another character in the same season. So,
Yeah.
but to do 2 back-to-backs one summer was quite a coup, and I was very excited about doing that. So yeah,
Way Down Cellar and Young Loner.
Way Down Cellar and The Young Loner, and The Young Loner was probably some of my best work. It was actually a pretty good little movie.
And then got to talk about the Phantom Tollbooth.
Yeah, there's been 3 or 4 things other than the Munsters in my career that I was really proud of. The Monkeys Christmas episode. The Phantom Tollbooth is Chuck Jones's only feature film. This is the legendary big shot in animated history, one of them anyway, Chuck Jones. And what he did is he decided he wanted to do a movie based on this book by Norman Juster called The Phantom Tollbooth. His idea was to make this like a Wizard of Oz annual event on television that would be seen, in forever. And unfortunately, what happened at MGM Studios, right at the time the movie came out, they got out of the movie business, and they built the MGM Grand Hotel in Las Vegas, and they didn't support the release of the movie, so it fell by the wayside. You could still catch it on Turner Classics and this and that, but it never really became the big hit that Chuck was hoping for. But for me, for 2 years, I got to work every 3 or 4 months. I would go back in the studio as they would develop more animation to voiceover, and I'm working with, in front of the camera, I'm with Chuck Jones directing me, but behind the scenes, I'm with Mel Blanc, June Foray, Dawes Butler,
Hans Conried,
the best of the best.
Les Tremaine. That film has absolutely
Everybody.
the best
Yep.
available voice actor, cartoon actors of its time.
So when I come to a show like this and I see all these voice actors around me, I was so lucky to actually be in the room with the heavy hitters and the greats before the Comic-Cons came into play. This was like the who's who of the voiceover people, and I was lucky enough to work, hand in hand with these guys, and it was amazing.
I'm a huge Han Conried fan.
Yeah,
so
it was really cool.
Yeah, that's just and again, it's criminal because the book is still moderately well known, and so many people to this day is still like, they made a movie. I'm like, yeah, here,
And they're doing a remake. They are going to do a remake, and we've been both Norman Juster. I met Norman Juster 2 years ago, first time. I went to his house and spent about 3 hours with him. It was a really great meeting. He gave me an autographed book, and he and I posed for photos. And I thought, we should go out and do screenings of the Phantom Tollbooth together. It would be fun.
That would.
And here they're making one, so maybe we'll have a chance to do a little, by chance cameo in it or something.
That's good. Yeah, you're right. That shows up. And we got to talk about your association with Sid Marty Krofft and the the wackiness that was Lidsville.
CNR, Charles Nelson Riley, my summer of '71.
Yep.
Sid Krofft Marty Krofft actually had reached out to me. They called my agency, and my mom happened to be working at the agency, and she convinced them that I should be the right call for this person called Mark in this new show called Lidsville. At the time, I'm in high school, senior in high school. This was not my idea of a move forward in a career to go to Saturday morning. So I turned it down several times. And finally, the Cowsills, I'm going to high school with the Cowsills, and they've pretty much told me, who turns down work? It's 11 weeks. Nobody will be up to see it. It's Saturday morning. Take the money and run. So I agree to do it. I go down to meet with the guys, and I notice a picture of the Bugaloos, and Caroline Ellis's picture's there, and I go, well, maybe I'll run into her. She's cute. Never met her, but she is cute. And I wound up doing Lidsville with Charles Nelson Riley, and Sid and Marty Krofft pretty much owned Saturday morning from 1969 to 1979. Their shows, there's a laundry list of them. They actually did some nighttime stuff with the Bradys and the Donnie and Marie show. Yep. They made a few movies, but they were really strong players in the Saturday morning thing. And I actually had an interview for Shazam to go up and possibly do that show as well, but it worked out that you couldn't have two shows on Saturday morning at the same time. So Michael Gray wound up doing it. I actually guest starred with Michael.
You did an episode of that.
Did an episode. But Lidsville turned out to be a very, not the most popular Krofft show, because that pretty much goes to HR Puff and stuff, but a good runner-up to it in most people's opinion.
Absolutely. Charles Nelson Riley, what was he like? Because he just looks like everything you'd imagine he would have been.
Well, he hated the makeup, so he had complaints constantly about the makeup. And I used to laugh at him and I'd brag on him. I'd say, I did this for 2 years. Come on, man up, guy. It's makeup.
That's true.
Come on, geez, you're whining, you're crying to the wrong guy. So he was a very popular guy. He was on a lot of different series. He was very active, but he was gay back before being gay was mainstream type of thing. So he had a crush on me, and I spent a lot of my time dodging Charles Nelson Riley's advances.
Oh.
But I was, it wasn't that big of a deal. It was a playful thing. It was like, oh, I love you, I love you, and I don't care who knows it. Charles, stop, please. So one thing led to another, and Billie Hayes, who played Jeannie, she was gay. So we had Billie was gay with Kay, who are still together. Charles, bless his heart, he's gone, and they used to all go out together as two couples because in Hollywood it would look like, oh, okay, it's just
they were each other's beards.
Yeah, exactly. So it was great, but it was a really wild time because we had all these little people in hats, Charles and Billie, myself, and I had known most of the little people because when you're in Hollywood as a kid, they have stand-ins for you, but they never use another kid to be a stand-in for another kid. So you get to know all the little people in Hollywood. And
so you had met Felix before that?
I met Felix. He was my stunt double in My Favorite Martian when I was 7 years old.
Wow.
I've known Felix longer than anybody in Hollywood. And Felix Silla, by the way, that's cousin Ed, and he was also my stunt double on the Munsters and Twiggy. And I mean, he's done a huge body of work. Yeah. He's been in every major movie, you name it, he's done it.
Yeah, if it didn't start Billy, if it wasn't Billy Barty, it was usually Felix.
Yep.
Yeah, and Felix was always in the costumes. Yeah. God bless him. And speaking of Cousin It and stuff, could we talk about the Addams Family variety show pilot thing, where basically you play the Earth 2 Pugsley Addams?
Probably the worst one-off series ever tried and created, and I played Pugsley.
How did they rope you into that? Did they just confuse the two?
No,
they came from the show.
It was just a job, and it was Jack Riley played Gomez, and Pat McCormick was Lurch, and Liz Torres was Morticia, but Stubby K was Uncle Fester. I mean, this is just horrible casting.
And then this was an attempt at a variety show.
A variety show, and we had our guest star for the first pilot was Jim Neighbors sang, and it was just all over the place. It was so bad. It was horrible.
And I guess it would have been buried, but as I read about it, I guess a bunch of UHF stations bought it and ran it as a special for a couple of years.
The Addams Family, and then we all sang at the end of the show, "Come on, baby, light my fire," as the house collapses around us. Just horrible. This is one I'd like to forget.
Well, sorry I brought it up, but
no, it's good. No, in Hollywood, everybody's got a role that got away, or the one that they wish they hadn't done. That's the one I wish I hadn't done. But the role that got away, it's funny too, because Richard Dreyfuss is here at this show. I didn't want to cut my hair right after Lidsville. An unknown director comes to the beach and tracks me down. His name is George Lucas. And he comes up to me and he goes, "Are you interested in doing a movie? I notice you're into cars and stuff." And I said, "Yeah, I like cars." And he goes, "Well, you're going to have to cut your hair." Before he said anything else, I said, "No. Cut him off. No, not interested."
You're going to have to cut your hair.
So obviously 2 years later, I see American Graffiti. And that's the movie that I said no to before I even got a chance to read the script. And later on, I found out that the role he had me in mind for was Richard Dreyfuss's role. But it's like, it wasn't meant to be. I talked to Cindy Williams about it. She goes, "You could have been my brother." And then my mom asked why I didn't get an interview for Star Wars for Mark Hamill's role. And I said, "Well, Mom, I kind of toned him down a couple of years ago. I don't think he's going to give me a second chance." And that's my role that got away was the American Graffiti role. If I would have gotten it. It's a big if.
Yeah, you did a bit part in Shazam with Jackson Bostwick. Again, and that was Filmation. Again, I'm just still reeling the fact that you're the only person in history that's been on a version of the Addams Family and a version of the Munsters. And because there's always been the old gag of who'd win a fight between the Addams Family and the Munsters. And when the internet first invented, that must have been the third, the argument thread they'd have on that stuff. Then after that, you started getting into music, and that became your focus.
I don't sing. Believe me, but in the early '70s, a group called Sugarloaf's manager came to me after Lidsville. Bobby Sherman had just been let go by Metro Media Records, and they were trying to create a David Cassidy type singer situation. And they sought me out, and I met with them. I told them I don't sing. They go, "Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We can fix it, in the studio." And
you fit the suit, kid.
I said, "Okay." And and I did American Bandstand. I headlined over Loggins and Messina, and we went on the road and we went out. But when you can't actually sing, it really limits what you can do to promote the product. And I tried it. We'd had some fun. It was great to play rock star for a year. Then I like to say I was the original Munster Manilli. I was lip syncing my way to stardom long before Milli Vanilli. And then in 1983, when MTV came out, they were on the air for about a year. I think they came on in '82. We decided, meaning me and my partners, decided to make rock videos. And since we didn't have a record deal and we didn't really have a band, we decided to use some lyrics that I had written for the Munster theme. And we said, "Whatever Happened to Eddie" was the name of the song, and then Eddie and the Monsters was the group. And our claim to fame was that we were the first unsigned act ever to be on MTV. Which was quite a coup back then, because it really was a pay-for-play situation in the record industry where you had to buy your way onto the airwaves, even on MTV. So from that idea, they noticed that, wow, there must be a lot of other unknowns or non-signed acts that have videos out. Maybe we should have a show that will showcase some of this talent, and they opened up the basement tapes from that idea. So I'd like to think that we helped some people maybe achieve their dream of record deals and stardom via the basement tapes, which we kind of launched. So that was kind of a good thing. But that is my record career in a nutshell. It's funny, Whatever Happened to Eddie is still very popular. I go into radio stations, they pull it up from somewhere and play the heck out of it. And yet it was just a little, kind of a whimsical little deal that we did in 1983.
Nice, very nice.
35 years ago. Yikes.
Then looks like you kind of chilled for a bit, and you then started rolling back again. Tell us about Macabre Theater for a while.
Yeah,
I was in the early double lots.
I was living in Orlando, and we were just talking about stuff, and I started doing the convention circuit 30-some-odd years ago. And I always said, these horror hosts, if they ever want to have a slam dunk, an easy one, all they got to do is create the Munster set. And I come out, 1313 Theater was the original name. Mm-hmm. We were going to do that. Ivana Cadaver, actually, my co-host, was the producer of the show. But during filming, there was the girl that was going to be my sidekick really couldn't handle it. So Natalie, Ivana, stepped in and took on her role. And she did it so darn well that it just worked out that I phased myself out of it, and she became more of the Elvira horror host, and I was a sidekick back in 2000, and she's now the #1 show on U2 America, which is Mark Brunett's channel, from the guy that, he's created, I think, Survivor and Lost and a whole bunch of stuff. So anyway, she's doing really well with it, and I did like 20-some-odd episodes early on, but I actually named her Ivana after I went and saw an Austin Powers movie, Ivana Humpalot. Mm-hmm. I said, okay, her name's going to be Ivana, and then she came up with Cadaver. Okay. And that's the name.
Right on. So, all right, cool. We got, I'll go ahead and open up to our audience questions. I'm going to put a microphone up right here.
All right.
If y'all just want to go ahead and line on up beside that.
Anything. Well, not anything. Yeah, sure, anything.
Yeah.
What the heck. Come on up and ask some questions. Right here. Come on.
Throw some at us.
You got to join us.
When were you on General Hospital?
First year it was on. I believe it was 1962 or 3. I had the role of Dr. Hardy's girlfriend, Katie's son, which I think my name was Tommy, and it was one of those deals where you would set up a scene by coming in, waving a banner. You'd been to the baseball game with Dr. Hardy, and he would set you down, and pat you on the butt, and you'd scoot off, and then he would start talking to Katie. It was really good training for me because it wasn't done live, believe it or not. You would go in, you'd rehearse throughout the day, and then at 2 o'clock, they flipped the switch. It was going out live. So it was the closest thing to theater that I ever did. And I was on it for about 6 months.
When were you on Gunsmoke?
Gunsmoke, did 2 of them. Did one that was called Runt, and the other one I was called Tommy, I think. Tommy was very common. Called Mad Dog, and that was with Festus. So it was after Dennis Weaver had left, so it probably would have been 1963, 62, 63.
Does that work? Cool. We got something coming up. All
Come
right.
to the mic. You got these people like hiding in the back. I can see the back of it. I can see the silhouette.
We see you.
Hello.
Hi.
I was just wondering, you grew up on the sets and around the studios. I was wondering if there was anybody that you really got starstruck about or any actors you particularly admire.
Well, I had a huge crush on the first Marilyn Munster, Beverly Owen. I like to say she took me on my first date because she was so sweet. She came down on her day off, picked me up in a little Volkswagen, and I lived like 20 miles away. And she drove me all the way back up, and we went and saw Mary Poppins together at Grauman's Chinese Theater. I was in heaven.
She was a cutie.
Oh, she was a cutie. And over the years, though, I've been very blessed. I've met a lot of interesting people. I actually met Walt Disney. Was like, a highlight even though I was a young kid.
I'm about to say, you didn't. I think all the child actors had to have an audience for a Walt before you got approved.
Yeah, no, that wasn't the case. What happened was I was actually in a World of Color as an atmosphere kid that he picked up. Hey, little Billy, what do you think of this parade? Oh, gee, Mr. Disney, I think it's great.
Okay.
And then I wound up working in a studio, and that was awesome. My grandfather was an animator out there as well. He created Elsie the cow for Borden. But when you're working at Disney, whatever you create is a Disney creation. Yeah. It's not a Artwood creation. Rod Serling, had a pleasure of meeting him. Twilight Zone is my favorite show of all time. I was at Paramount doing Lidsville, and we met at a lunch one day, and I only met him briefly. But I got to tell you, immediately knew where these shows were coming from out of this man's head. He knew he was from another dimension. I kid you not. If there was ever an alien walking amongst us, it had to be Rod Serling, in a good way. He just had some thoughts that you could just sense were real from some other dimension. I mean, it was just too good. He was just too good at that thing and that other dimension and stuff. Later on, I was lucky enough to work with Evel Knievel. I was a huge fan of Evel Knievel. We did some commercials for Little Caesars, and we became friends and started hanging out together. I always loved race cars, so recently I got a chance to meet Mario Andretti. These are the people to me that are like bigger than life. I was never really too impressed with the acting stuff. The actors, they were just regular guys to me, other actors just doing a job. But I was lucky enough to work with lots of them. And to be honest with you, Fred and Al on the Munsters were very, very good at what they did. They were a great comedy team. They worked well together. They were nice folks, and I was blessed to have been around them. And Yvonne DiCarlo was a big movie star back in the '40s. I mean, she was up there with Betty Grable and Lana Turner and all the biggies. That Howard Hughes was even dating her. To give you an idea of, he was only after the best. So those are a few that I was lucky enough to have been in awe of.
Thank you for the question.
Mm-hmm.
Have another one? I thought I saw somebody get it. All right, go ahead.
Stan Lee?
Excuse me?
Did you ever get to work with Stan Lee?
Stan? No, I met Stan. Never had a chance to work with him. Sweetheart guy. What a nice guy. What a huge loss. But what a life he led. Amazing. Who would have ever thought that about half of all the movies coming out of Hollywood would wind up being Marvel, superhero things, and they're great. I mean, it's like if you like comic books as a kid, look what you get. Look what you have now as an adult. You got the real deal movies, and they're all really great.
Mm-hmm. Cool. You have another?
Yes.
We
can't see you, so you have to help us
Yeah,
out
you
here.
gotta come on up to the mic if you can.
Anybody?
Going once.
Going twice.
Going. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
I got one. Al Lewis, was he a marijuana legalization advocate, or was he just an old stoner?
What did he say?
Was Al just an actual advocate of legalization of marijuana, or just an old
Oh,
stoner?
Al was he just liked to get.
Go ahead.
He was an activist. He loved to get a rise out of you, and he loved confrontational stuff. And he just, he was all for anything that would get attention. Whether you loved him or whether you hated him, you always remembered him. He was an NBA scout. He had his radio show. His restaurant in Greenwich Village on Bleecker Street was owned by John Gotti. He was connected with the mob. He ran for governor. He ran for senator. He was a staple in New York City. I mean, when I was with Al walking down, and he was a big guy. He was like 6'3". People think that Fred, was huge. Well, Fred was on shoes this tall, where Al was 6'3". So when you'd walk down the street with him, everybody, horns would honk, cabbies, hey, Grandpa, and he was he was like a New Yorker extraordinaire. But he was a very big. If you ever remember the FCC thing with Howard Stern, after Howard went to New York and he was banned by the FCC and he brought Al Lewis up on stage and Al grabbed the mic and it was kind of like the Zapruder film.
Yeah.
Al Howard's trying to get the mic back from him as Al's going, F the FCC. And Howard couldn't get the microphone away from him fast enough. But that's Al.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Come on, folks.
Going once. Going. All right,
Okay.
Eddie.
Did you enjoy your time as Eddie?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I did. It was a very fun show to do. We had great guests come by. The Beatles came on the set. I wasn't working that day, of course. We had astronauts. Wally Schirra came by. The Universal Studios tour started in 1964, the same year that we started our show. And before all the big tours and the city walks and all the massive places built up, this little tram used to come cruising through, and they would bring all these people onto the Munster set, and it was like the #1 destination for everybody because the show was just so well liked, and they wanted to see the sets and they wanted to see the makeup. So when I had time to show the soundstage myself, like on a Monday or Tuesday when we weren't filming, I love doing tours for other people. I would show them Grandpa's lab and the hidden panels and the rollout coffin phone booth and spot under the stairs. It was just a great set to be a kid on. And then when I had free time, next door was stage 29, which is the Phantom of the Opera set and the sound stage, 6 stories tall. And up in the catwalks, way up in the ceiling, you could get up there, and it was just a great place to, that's what kids do. They like to go places they're not supposed to go that are semi-dangerous. And that's what I did whenever I could get away. And my favorite destination in the back was McHale's Navy's Lagoon. Ernie Borgnine and Tim Conway were great. They were very, you got to imagine, you're the only kid on the lot. So you're in makeup, they know you're supposed to be there, and you can go exploring, and you know how to open a door and not make any noise to ruin a shot. Yeah. So you can sort of sneak around as a professional and an equal, but yet you're only about this tall. And you're an Eddie Munster outfit, so it was really cool to be befriended by a lot of the peers. I remember like Charlton Heston would have lunch with me. He's got a Mo Howard haircut for El Cid, and Alfred Hitchcock would give me a ride in his limo down to the commissary, and it was wonderful. You go into work, but it was a really cool place to be hanging out for a couple years for sure.
Right on. Got time for one more. If anyone wants to. Bring it home for us.
Bring it home.
How about this?
Someone who just came in, that sat down, who's got a question? We just had some late arrivers. No. Okay, well,
how about this? What social media outlets can we follow you on if we don't already?
Okay, well, here, I'll tell you what. I got a couple things happening, too.
Yeah, but tell us what's going on.
Stuff. Yeah. Number one, the gentleman, anybody remember Super Scary Saturday on TBS with Al Lewis back in the 80s?
Yes.
He would make fun of horror movies. The same guy contacted me, Jeff Grimshaw. I wanted to work with him even when I met him 30 years ago because I just liked his style. Well, now he and I are doing a live stream format video called Eddie's Monstrous Movie Mausoleum. The trick is, I told him, I can't really carry a show like Al Lewis because that's not my shtick. But what we're going to do for comic relief, I'm going to be the straight man, and we're going to have guest horror hosts every episode from around the country. So we may have Sven Gulli, we may have Ivana Cadaver, we may have Dr. Paul Bearer, wherever it may be, we're going to host.
I have a horror host character.
Okay, there you go.
In Orlando. We'll talk later.
Okay, they're done. So that's going to be the shtick there, and it's going to be subscription, $10 a year. You can't go wrong. So that's one thing. Another thing is, a friend of mine finally got the ear of Paramount Studios for a developmental deal, and I always thought it'd be funny for me and Lou Ferrigno to have a show together where I hire him as a personal body, trainer, because he's the big green guy and I'm the little green guy. So I told this guy about this a long time ago. Well, lo and behold, Dr. Phil Productions and Oprah and Steven Spielberg out of Paramount are developing a show for me and Lou Ferrigno to where I guess I'm a rich entrepreneur, inventor of some sort in Hollywood, and I hire Lou. We become friends, and people start noticing that we have similar characteristics, and it becomes something like twins of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito. And I don't know where it's going to go, but I think it would be hilarious because Lou's a great guy. He comes to these shows as well. But Lou and me on screen, he's huge. I'm little. So you're definitely going to see the twins connection there. So we might have a show in the works, and if not, I travel around the country with my cars doing automotive events. Munsters.com is my website. From there, you can get to the official Munsters fan group with 19,000 active members, and that'll lead you down the road to everything else we do. I want to thank you all for coming out.
Tell us about the cars.
The Munster Coach and Dragula. I bought these cars 3 years ago. They're tribute vehicles. I was hired to do a haunted attraction, and they hired him, the guy, to drive me around dressed up as Grandpa in the Munster Coach. We became friends. He retired. He wanted to sell the cars. I wound up buying them. And then I started doing automotive events, drag strips, NASCAR, Indy Racing League, automotive dealerships, car shows, anything automotive related. And that's kind of what I normally do. My cars are in Florida. I usually have them in tow, and we take up a 30 by 30 foot spot with a big presence. But that's the cars. So that's what I wind up doing now.
Right on.
Thank you.
Butch Patrick,
one
ladies.
more.
Oh, one more.
One
Yeah,
more.
one more. Latest on it, young lady.
She's got a plethora of questions.
Because you mentioned the cars, you know they do the Cavalcade of Customs, and they do this thing called Cavalcade of Customs. It's a
Yeah,
car
we've
show.
done Autorama, Cavalcade Customs. They also own, let me see, they got Autorama, World of Wheels, Cavalcade Customs, NSRA shows. I'm on the road 52 weeks a year.
Do you go to any of those conventions?
I do, yeah. I do some of those. And I also wound up buying my this is a real quick story, too. 8th grade, I'm living with my same grandma that I went to the Munsters. After the Munsters, I moved back with her to Missouri, small town, went to the 8th grade. She lived in a big 1875 mansion that was haunted, and I wound up buying the house to save it from the wrecking ball. I live in it now, a few months out of the year. And if you can see all this stuff on Munsters Events is my YouTube channel. So if you want to go see what I'm up to, Munsters Events, we've got actual videos of ghosts doing their stuff at my house. And I thought it was kind of ironic that I wound up buying Grandma's house to save it from the wrecking ball. And here the ghosts are coming out in droves. So maybe we'll have a Eddie Munster meets Andy of Mayberry in the Twilight Zone elevator. That's my elevator pitch.
We look forward to it with bated breath.
Thanks, everybody.